This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
CT, you think your children are its children? Yes, we do. We do.
Yeah, well, if you've seen
This is
if you've seen one teachers union, you've pretty much seen them all. That's Stacey Gates, the current president of the Chicago Teachers Union. For some reason, she was invited to speak at the prestigious City Club of Chicago, where it's usually political leaders, certainly of different stripes, and they have them from both sides of the aisle, if you will, who often are invited to share their visions and their opinions and their thoughts. And speaking of vision, we certainly did learn something of Stacey Gates's vision of public education, and that is something we've suspected that the union bosses think and believe for a long time, and that is that our children belong to the union, belong to the system. Let's hear more of the context in which Stacey Gates made these comments.
Baldwin says the children are always ours.
Always. Always.
Every single one of them, all over the globe. And what comes next is, CT, you think your children are its children? Yes, we do. We do. We do. CTU thinks all children belong to it, and there's socialist conspiracy ideology. Well, I don't know about all that, but we like children. We educate them, we nurture them, we protect them, we support them, we negotiate for them, we create space for them. We even have them in our homes.
That's right, folks. That's Stacey Gates, the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, saying that your kids aren't yours. When they're in school, at least, which is most of their early life, they belong to the system. They belong to the union, which is part of the system, which includes bureaucrats who oppose freedom for parents, who oppose parent involvement in their children's education, which is really ironic because they'll blame parents for not being involved as really being at the heart of many of the problems of our public education system, and yet they will go to the mat to deny parents the ability to choose where and how their children are educated. By the way, I don't know if I'm more concerned about what Stacey Gates said about that, or she said, well, the socialist ideologies, I don't know about all that. See, you can be a socialist and not know it. Okay, you can, and that's pretty dangerous territory. But back to the point, this isn't just rhetoric. This is a mindset that puts union power, system control over parents and over students, and it has got to end at some point. When I saw this, it reminded me of this quote by Michael Malise, who's a pretty well-known libertarian author. He said, socialists regard your property as their property, but even more nefariously regard your children as their property. So here we have a school system in Chicago, Illinois, one of the largest cities in America. At times it's ranked number 2, other times number 3, as terms of being the largest city, certainly one of the larger school districts. Their schools are crumbling. Their enrollment is down 70,000 students over the last decade. Some schools are spending close to $93,000 per student. That was reported recently by Fox News, and fewer than 1 in 3 kids can read at grade level. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like another school system you've heard about? How about the one that we're sitting in its district right now? See, it's fine. Everybody can talk about Chicago, and I want to lay out what's happening there because it's not good. They're spending in some of the schools there. There was some calculation done about spending, per pupil spending, when you include spending for capital projects, spending for teachers' pensions, benefits, salaries, compensation. that some schools were spending over $90,000 per pupil. And yet, only 1 in 3 kids in that school system can read at grade level, which means they are not prepared for their future careers, whether academically or in the workforce. And yet, the union is fighting closing some schools. They fight turning some failing schools into charter schools or allowing some charter schools to have some leftover public school property. And they are pushing for a $1.5 billion contract this year. So none of this says we're prioritizing kids over this system. None of this says we're prioritizing kids' futures. This is what happens when unions prioritize their control over kids' futures. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you've seen one teachers union, you've seen them all. And we may not have the kind of attention-getting, radical, in-your-face, screeching of a Stacey Gates in our unions here. Sometimes I wonder if it might not be better if we did. Then I think taxpayers and people here in Kentucky would absolutely not tolerate that. And they would get a real sense of really what's happening and the negative influence and consequences of the unions upon our system. The Jefferson County Teachers Association, which is the local union, they have a collective bargaining agreement with the local school system. They represent thousands of teachers in the Louisville Public Schools. They are the most powerful, controlling teachers union in the state. We also, of course, have the Kentucky Education Association, which is the statewide teachers union, but ironically, teachers are not required to join that. I like to say we had right to work here in Kentucky even before we had right to work, and it was with the teachers. They were not forced to join the union. But like Chicago's union, JCTA, the Jefferson County Teachers Association, has often demonstrated without question that it is more about protecting its own interests than it is about fixing education. Kentucky's public schools, only 36% of students in our Jefferson County school system can read proficiently in the 4th grade, 29% in math. By the way, I thought school choice evangelist Corey DeAngelis' response to Stacey Gates' nonsense on X was quite appropriate. I thought he said the irony is glaring. Well, he actually told Fox News Digital this. The irony is glaring. If the CTU were a parent, it would lose custody for educational neglect and abuse, given the catastrophic failure of Chicago's public schools. Isn't that right? Here she's talking about children belonging to them and that they care for them and that they educate them and they negotiate for them and on. And yet, they're neglecting their educational progress, and they're using the kids to protect their own power and their own security. But we've seen the same thing here with Jefferson County. JCTA has fought tooth and nail against school choice. Think charter schools or opportunity scholarships that let parents pick the best fit for their kids. In 2021, the Jefferson County Teachers Union lobbied hard against House Bill 563, which would have expanded school choice options, claiming, quote, it drains public school funds. But aren't these dollars parents' tax dollars? Aren't these taxpayer dollars? Why can't they decide where the money goes? Jefferson County Teachers Union also pushed back on performance-based pay for teachers, keeping a system not based on merit, not based on performance, not based on how well we're doing with our kids and our students, but how long we've managed to hang around the system. So you can have a terrible teacher who's failed year after year with their kids, and yet because of their seniority, they can be paid more and have more job security than a younger, brighter, new teacher who's really dedicated to educating their kids and who's actually doing so. So this isn't about helping kids. This is about maintaining a monopoly. And I often think about a quote that was attributed to Albert Shanker, who was former president of the American Federation for Teachers for over 20 almost 25 years back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And he gets attributed with saying, when school children start paying union dues, that's when I'll start representing the interest of school children. Now, there's some dispute about what he actually said, but I find it kind of humorous that his defenders will say, well, he probably didn't say that. He probably said something like, I represent teachers, not children. Okay. Well, do you see the tone deafness here? Either way, Albert Shaker was telling the truth. And we've seen this played out, that the unions will oppose any cuts, any reforms, any choices, any changes. Stacey Gates is demanding that the Chicago Public Schools Board help fulfill her district's $529 million gap. Why? To better educate kids? No. But it's to protect the adults in the system who, with the drop in student enrollment and more parents deciding to find another way to educate their children, are losing their reason for even being hired there. And she's going to protect them at all costs. So she doesn't want to make any cuts in the system. She wants to borrow more money for a failing system. We saw this as well, just the tone deafness. We saw it with COVID. We saw it here in Jefferson County. The Jefferson County Teachers Union, just like the Chicago Teachers Union, opposed reopening our schools even after the CDC said it was safe, even after the health experts said it was safe. It was all about protecting the adults in the system. It's got to change. Well, speaking of Jefferson County schools, they're now using copyright laws to deny parents' requests to see curriculum and material used in the classroom. We're going to talk about this coming up on the Kentucky's Voice show right here on right here. Stay with us. Don't go away. We've got Miranda Stovall, a parent who's challenging this.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And thanks for staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice. We're here every weekday, 11 to noon, and I'm usually in this seat on Wednesdays. It's hump day. That's good news today, and we appreciate you staying with us. Please send us your comments. 502-571-0970 is our Kentucky's Voice text line. We'll get to some texts which are coming in. They're flooding in, and we'll get to some of them later in the program today. But right now, we're tackling a disturbing trend, the weaponization of federal federal copyright laws to block parents from accessing public records. And we're delighted to be today to be joined by a group of folks working on this issue, including Miranda Stovall, who's fighting to see a mental health survey given to her child in school, fighting to get a copy of that. And right here in Jefferson County, Miranda's a mom of 4, and she advocates for parental rights, education reform, education transparency in Kentucky. And as part of that advocacy, she requested a copy of a survey administered to one of her children under the state's open record laws. And the company that administered the survey is known. It's Pearson, a group that notoriously pushes radical ideologies while asking very invasive questions of children about their mental health and their families. Well, surprise of all surprises here, shock of all shock, the school district denied her request, claiming that the contents, and here was their reason for denying it, claiming that the contents of the survey were copyrighted. So the Southeastern Legal Foundation filed a lawsuit working with Miranda on her behalf, and she wants to access these surveys and other curriculum in JCPS so she can publicize what students are being taught and engage in open debate about what's happening in the school district. So Miranda joins us now by phone, taking a few minutes out of a family vacation to speak with us. And also joining us is Kim Herman, president of the Southeastern Legal Foundation, a wonderful group who is helping Miranda in this case. And I'm so glad that you are. It's so great to have you on board and working on this. And she's representing Miranda's in this lawsuit. And also joining us is Ryan Mulvey, who's Senior Policy Counsel with Americans for Prosperity, who's authored a wonderful amicus brief for the lawsuit, which has now been filed in federal court. And I guess we'll begin here with Miranda today. Miranda, you requested a digital copy of this mental health survey conducted by your district. Tell us kind of how this began and what were the red flags for you and what motivated you to file this lawsuit?
Well, throughout my work that I do, my advocacy work that I do, we know that mental health surveys, social emotional surveys can ask some pretty invasive questions of children. And when I saw the email come across letting parents know that they were going to administer this survey to all children in JCPS, I was curious what the questions were. And I feel like as a parent, I have a right to know what those questions are. So
yeah,
that prompted me to file that open records request.
Yeah, and so it seems pretty apparent that the school district knew that you probably weren't going to be very happy with what you found. Do you get that sense that this was not about some copyright? That using the issue that this was copyright was almost like trying to find a way to deny you this information, not about a real concern about copyright laws.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. Well, and so let me ask you this: did the school what did they say to you when you asked them this? Did they offer to let you come in and look at this, but not give you a copy? What happened there with that? Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah. Yes, I was offered to come in with the counselor and view the survey. However, I was not allowed to write anything down or take pictures or anything like so. It was just they did not want me to have a physical copy or any kind of digital copy of the survey.
Yeah. Well, let's bring in Kim Herman now. Kim, give us an update here on kind of where we are legally with this. Could you just kind of where this case is? I know there's part of this issue is, I'll put it this way for us lay people, who has jurisdiction here? Is it a state court? Is it a federal court? Who makes that decision? And can you help us kind of understand what's going on with this case?
Yeah, absolutely. So we filed this case on behalf of Miranda in federal court because what we're really dealing with is how state open records laws interact with copyright law and other federal laws. Parents have a right to see what's happening in their kids' schools. They have a right to get these documents. They're considered instructional materials, which, again, under federal law, under state law, every parent has a right to see these secret surveys, to see curriculum, to see teacher trainings, and to get copies of them. Kentucky law specifically states that parents and any members of the public can get records of public documents. And so we filed this lawsuit, and the federal district court said this is a state issue, ignoring the fact that what we're really fighting over is whether or not this is protected by copyright. All Miranda wants is to see this document and to be able to share it with other parents. She's not looking to sell it. She's not looking to profit off of it.
Right.
And copyright law considers that a fair use.
Yeah.
And so now we've appealed it to the Sixth Circuit and are just simply fighting over what court can rule on this issue.
Yeah, because if this is allowed to stand, that argument could be used for any request almost that a parent makes that would have to do with curriculum, right? I mean, you've said that if the JCPS continues to stonewall Miranda and other parents, it's going to shut the door to transparency, accountability, and this is very important for our public education system, especially when it's not performing well at all for our students. This is just another indication to me that this is just a tactic being used, not real concern here about any, because we already have copyright laws, right? If somebody misuses the material, right, and they sell it or they do something, there's already laws to cover that.
Absolutely, right. And so their copyright is protected. And this is not a Kentucky-specific issue, unfortunately. This is something that we've been seeing over the last several years across the entire country. And that's why there's been model legislation. We've seen states adopting it. We need to see more states adopting it. And it's not just for curriculum. This can be for any document. And the state courts cannot resolve this issue. And so then parents are going to be left in a quagmire and completely stonewalled from seeing what's happening with their kids inside of schools.
Yeah, and states can't do it because we've got to have, if we have 50 different copyright laws, I mean, this is going to be chaos. And it will be the folks who have a nefarious agenda who will be able to use that to their advantage to deny parents and stonewall parents. Real quickly, because I want to get back to Miranda just for a moment before this segment ends, but what about Kentucky law right now? Does it offer any protection against this? What does Kentucky need to do to protect its parents on this issue?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking about Miranda. I mean, what we need to see across the entire country, or we need to see states that actually specifically prevent these types of secret surveys from happening. We have federal law that says that schools cannot give students invasive surveys without showing parents the surveys in advance and getting their consent. We need to see that adopted at a state level. And then we also need to see states adopting laws that specifically state that these are not protected by copyright because they're being used for a fair use. And so there's some great model legislation out there. I know that you mentioned Ryan earlier, who's going to talk about that a little bit. But we need to see state changes at a legislative level to stop this so we don't have to keep going to court because it takes a long time. It's expensive, and parents need to see what's in their schools now.
Yeah, a lot of parents, and Miranda, before we close the segment, we're just back to you for a moment. The fact that the school district denied this, even if it was legal for them to do so, they didn't have to, did they? They didn't have to deny you this access to this. So doesn't that tell you, doesn't that concern you? The fact that they still didn't have to deny this, even though it may have been, even if it was legal. It wasn't legal, but even if it was, they didn't have to. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is concerning because that's where the trust gets broken with parents when it comes to schools that their children are in. And, parents, I think if they would have just said, yeah, here's the survey and let me look at it, it might not have been as bad as it,
right.
But the trust is broken, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Miranda Stovall. We appreciate you standing up. And thanks for joining us here for a few minutes on your family vacation. We appreciate it. And Kim Herman, also from the Southeastern Legal Foundation. Thank you all. Coming up, Ryan Mulvey will talk more about this case and his perspective and what we need to do here to help parents.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
And thanks for staying with us here on Kentucky's Voice. Jim Waters in with you today. And our Kentucky's Voice text line, 502-571-0970. We'll get to some of those in our final segment today. We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts about the Jefferson County Public Schools saying that a parent can't see a survey given to students about mental health issues because of copyright laws, because it's copyrighted by the company, so they can't get a copy of that. Does that concern you? It should. It should concern you greatly. We're talking about a lawsuit that's been filed to try to bring an end to some of this nonsense by Miranda Stovall, who we heard in the last segment. Great to have her on with us today. And also, it's great to have with us Ryan Mulvey, who's Senior Policy Counsel at Americans for Prosperity Foundation, which filed an amicus brief supporting Miranda's in this case. And so, Ryan, thanks for taking a few minutes here to join us. We appreciate your help here and your support on this. You've done a great job with this brief, which argues that copyright law really is being misused to block access for parents to have information here. Let's unpack that a little bit. Your brief says copyright law can't be a shield for bureaucrats to avoid accountability. What are some of your thoughts? Kind of flesh that out a little bit for us. What are you concerned about? Why are you doing this? And what do you see as part of the bigger picture as well?
Well, I think there's a couple things to unpack here. And by the way, thanks for having me. This is great. This is a very important case. I'm glad that you're and very appreciative that you're bringing this to the attention of your listeners and your viewers.
Thank you.
I think at its heart, the problem here is a mischaracterization and weaponization of federal copyright. The Copyright Act is not a withholding statute. It doesn't provide, or it's not supposed to provide, Congress didn't intend for it to provide a means for withholding records of government from the public. What it does is it regulates access, and it says that if people who get hold of copyrighted material misuse it, they're liable.
Right.
Now, but that's not how it's being used by Kentucky, by the school district here. And it's not how it's being used by a lot of other state and local government entities, both in the context, especially of parental access to learning materials. And this is a really big trend that we've been seeing, but also by state and local government generally when dealing with citizen watchdogs and news media and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and your point about the fact that there are laws on the books, there's already protection for material that's copyrighted that would be used in a way to profit a person or in a way that's wrong. And so this seems like a lot of overreach until you understand that really, I believe the school systems many times are looking for ways to, especially if they know that material is going to be controversial, they're looking for ways to keep that from parents. This should people be concerned about this? Should parents be concerned about this?
It's a weaponization of federal law. It really is. And in the federal context, under the Federal Freedom of Information Act, for decades, the courts have been very clear that the Copyright Act cannot be used to withhold records. You have to let them go. Because the courts noticed if you allow government to use copyright to block access to records, independent from what the actual FOIA statute might say, then it's going to be used as a shield to hide anything that's embarrassing or controversial. And that's exactly what we're seeing with the parental access to curricular materials and in also shielding records from the news media. You're seeing creative use of copyright asserted on behalf of third parties. Because notice here, the school district said it's not our copyright, it's Pearson's, but we're still not going to let you see it. And that is deeply troubling. And it's a trend. And as Kim mentioned in the last segment, a lot of groups are starting to mobilize and provide model legislation and push for legislative fixes so that this can no longer happen. I mean, AFP has model legislation on this. We've seen a version of that passed and signed into law in Arkansas this past term, basically saying schools, you can't use this to prevent access to the learning materials. And more importantly, you can't enter into secret contracts with the groups like Pearson to require non-disclosure, because that also violates the FOIA. Because that's another aspect of the copyright abuse that we've seen, entities signing contracts with groups that produce surveys or other materials, or even you could imagine hypothetically publishing companies, right, and textbooks, parents who want to see the actual books that are being used for classroom instruction. Schools should not be saying we're going to prevent public access. They can't contract their way out of transparency.
So they're actually including this in contracts they're creating with these companies. This is so I'll ask you the same question I asked Miranda too in the last segment. So this really speaks, don't you think, to the mindset of the system? You know, even if the school district did act legally, technically, legally, and just let's say it didn't have to give her this survey, don't you think this speaks to the mindset of what the system really is intending to do? And that is to deny, as you said, to deny a parent information it knows is going to be controversial, information they're going to challenge, curriculum they're going to challenge. And if we start doing this across the board, you know, and I think we have a system here that would be happy to deny a lot of requests by parents. I think it speaks to the mindset of the system.
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely true. You know, already it's a misuse of copyright, but even if it were legal, as you set up in your hypothetical, you know, in most cases, you know, state laws are different in different places, but usually exemptions or grounds for withholding under FOIA laws are discretionary, which means that even if the government can withhold it, it doesn't have to. And most FOIA laws have a sort of presumption, the spirit of transparency at least, that there should be public access. And all the more so, I think, in the school context, where you have government schools instructing children, parents deserve to know what goes on in the classroom. But it's also any you know, police departments too, giving access to people who are concerned about how the police are behaving, or local town councils or planning commissions and concerned citizen activists. They face this same sort of mindset all over, and it's troubling, to say the least.
So talk a little bit, we're talking with Ryan Mulvey with the Americans for Prosperity. He's their senior policy counsel, and we appreciate you joining us, Ryan, here for a few minutes today. But talk about the need for this to be in federal court. This was another issue that how did the court get this wrong, right? They got it wrong in sending this back. The lower court got this wrong in sending this, or saying this had to be decided by a state court. Where did they come up with this? What was the reasoning for this? And what kind of chaos would we have if we didn't have, you know, federal copyright laws being enforced, and also enforced in a way that's in the spirit of the law, not what some local school district wants to do?
So I think the problem here was that the lower court saw this case as a question of how the Kentucky Open Records Act is supposed to be applied. And as Kim and Miranda both mentioned, it's not really a Kentucky Open Records Act case. This is about the use and abuse of the Federal Copyright Act. It happens to arise in the context of the Kentucky Open Records Act, but really the heart of the merits of the case, of what the judge would have needed to grapple with in offering the relief that Miranda sought, namely a court order that said, I hereby declare that your request for access to these surveys qualifies as fair use under federal law. That is a federal law question that needs to be decided by federal courts. And you have a problem if state courts all around the country come to different conclusions about federal law. I mean, there's actually exclusive federal jurisdiction over claims arising from the Copyright Act. So as you know, Miranda's attorneys argue in their appeal, really, this should be a very simple question because this is a interpretation of the Copyright Act, a question of fair use. Only federal courts should answer that. But even if you accept, and I apologize, there's I think a window washer behind me. If you accept that state courts could also hear this sort of case, if you look at the actual case law and how state courts have addressed this issue, most of them have said this is a problem. And even if our state FOIA doesn't allow the copyright, we might say there are other grounds, and we can't do anything about the fair use argument because that's a federal law question. So state courts don't want to take these cases because they don't think they have jurisdiction. So if the federal courts say no, go away, and the state courts say we can't help you, what's a concerned parent like Miranda supposed to do? They're left without a remedy.
So I'm kind of surprised there hasn't been more precedent. Has there not been a lot of precedent in this with federal courts?
No, to tell you the truth, I don't think there has been. I don't want to say that this is absolutely a case of first impression. It certainly seems that way in the Sixth Circuit.
So the Sixth Circuit, this ruling has a big impact just beyond this particular case here. I mean, this is the precedent set by the court is going to really be important here, isn't it?
I think so, and I think especially now because we have a noticeable increase in the use of copyright claims by state and local government. The issue hasn't really made it through to many federal courts. Miranda's case might be one of the first, but that, as you mentioned, underscores why it's so important for the Sixth Circuit to get this right and to explain why the lower court was wrong and why federal courts need to be providing the answer here. But no matter how that comes out, it's important for state governments to respond and to prevent this sort of dilemma from arising in the first instance. So we need model policies like AFPs or bills like the Arkansas legislation that passed in other states, maybe even Kentucky, so that we don't see schools and other state and local government entities hiding records from public eyes.
Yep. Unfortunately, we're going to have to think about that, it appears, in the future. So, Ryan Mulvey with Americans for Prosperity, Senior Policy Counsel. It's been great having you on. I hope we can, please keep us updated on this case, and we want to have you back with us on some other things too. So, you can be one of us. Have a great rest of the day. So, God bless. All right, stay tuned. Coming up in our final segment today, we're going to talk about red flag laws. We're going to talk about a new nomination to the federal judgeship from Kentucky.
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio online at kyvoice.org.
Jim Waters here with our final segment on today's program here on Kentucky's Voice. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day right here live on the radio. And then you can watch us this afternoon at 4 o'clock, as you can each weekday. Kentucky's Voice on WBNA Channel 21 right here in Louisville, Kentucky, right here in the heart of it all. We appreciate you taking some time to join us, also to respond on our text line at 502-5710970. We talked in our first segment today about the negative impact the teachers' unions are having on school districts based on some comments out of Chicago and the Chicago Teachers Union president there, Stacey Gates, and some of the just off the charts comments, radical, saying that the children in the district belong to the unions, belong to them, and talking also about the same mindset that we have in teachers unions across the country, including right here in Jefferson County. I mean, why else would a union oppose a parent's right to choose how, where, and in what way their children are educated if it wasn't about control, money, and power? That's what it is. It's not about the kids, because we see that the more control, the more power, the more money the teachers' unions have gotten, that the system has gotten, the less it's done in terms of educating our children. The job has gotten, the outcomes have gotten worse, not better, or at best stayed the same in many cases, certainly not improved. And it has to improve when only 1 in 3 of your kids can read proficiently, do math proficiently, and are not prepared for the future. This, in response to that, off our text line at 502-5710970, the texter says this is why companies are leaving Louisville. Kids can't do basic math and spelling. Have you seen an application for a young person applying for a job? Why should a company hire someone like that? It is absolutely shameful that graduates of JCPS cannot function in everyday society because they are ignorant, he says. It starts at home. Parents need to be concerned about their children's performance in school, but they are just as ignorant about what's going on as the children. Well, so I think there's some blanket statements there that don't necessarily apply, obviously, to all children or all parents or all families. I mean, I think there is a growing number of taxpayers and families in our community and in our state who are beginning to understand that the system, unfortunately, has other priorities than just the educating and preparation of their children. And I think this is going to show itself, and there's going to be responses based upon this changing mindset in the future. We're going to see that. But it is true that sometimes parents have been pretty naive about what's happening in their children's school and what's happening with their children's education. But I think that's changing to a large extent. I think more and more parents are concerned now. And, I think that it is unfortunate that by the time kids find out that they haven't been educated in this system, it's too late. They're graduated. They've gone on. They're struggling to make it, and without the tools they need. We cannot allow this to continue. And by the way, the answer is not more money. That's what groups are saying now. They're coming out, calling on the legislature to spend more money in the upcoming legislative session. Listen, folks, we have increased spending in education per pupil, funding in education by over 120%. Inflation adjusted since the Kentucky Education Reform Act was created back in 1990, and yet academic outcomes have remained very poor, and that's on state and national tests. The educational outcomes of our low-income minority students are terrible. They're in the pits, and so there's no reason here to believe that throwing more money at this problem is going to fix it. What we need is to re-empower parents and get them engaged by saying, you're going to decide what kind of education your child gets. We're going to help you, but you're going to make that decision, and not some nameless, faceless bureaucrat somewhere in a central office making six figures for whom we're paying their pensions and their health care benefits and their salaries, and they're failing us. Those days have to come to an end. 502-571-0970, our Kentucky's Voice text line. Would love to hear some more comments on this, and if you haven't, please send them our way. We'll try to get them in here as we can. In this final segment, did want to mention that my friend and former State Solicitor General Chad Meredith has been nominated by President Donald Trump to a federal judgeship in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky. The Kentucky State Senate put out a statement this week saying, as leaders of the Kentucky Senate majority, we proudly express our full support for Chad Meredith's nomination to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Kentucky. Chad is a principled legal mind, and his career has been defined by professionalism, fairness, and a deep respect for the Constitution. He brings a wealth of experience to this nomination, from the courtroom to the appellate bench, shaped by a devotion to the rule of law. We've known Chad for over a decade. He is a highly respected attorney with strong character, humility, intelligence, and integrity. Those who have worked with him know his commitment to justice is driven by principle. This is also a proud day for our colleague and friend, Senator Steve Meredith. We know how proud he must be to see his son nominated to serve the people of Kentucky and the nation with honor. It is in a time when our nation's courts deserve thoughtful and grounded leadership. Chad Meredith's record stands on its own. We are confident he will serve with distinction and encourage the U.S. Senate to move forward with his confirmation. I couldn't agree more. Chad Meredith served as the state's first Solicitor General under Governor Matt Bevin. He also wrote the amicus brief for the Bluegrass Institute defending public charter schools as constitutional. He's been on this program in the past, and in these kinds of nominations, this should give us hope. Even for a legal system that is, in many ways, has been weaponized, misused, and in an unconstitutional manner, Chad Meredith will go far. And folks, I'm going to say, could he even possibly one day sit on the nation's highest court? He certainly has the temperament, the humility, the intellectual ability and integrity to do so. But wherever he's at, he will serve with honor. Congratulations, my friend Chad Meredith, on this nomination. And thank you to President Donald Trump for doing this. Texas banning red flag seizure, gun seizure laws, and they legalized short barrel shotguns. So the bill was signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott. And what it does is prohibiting state or local authorities from enacting or enforcing laws allowing temporary firearm removal from individuals deemed to be a risk to themselves or others without a criminal conviction or full due process. And the supporters of this bill, which includes groups like Texas Gun Rights and National Rifle Association, argue that red flag laws violate due process by allowing gun confiscation based on, and here's the key, subjective assessments without a trial. So it sounds good on the surface when you first hear it. Hey, people who are deemed to be a risk to themselves should not have a weapon. But the problem is, or people without a criminal conviction, and this is a problem, that people without a criminal conviction could be denied their Second Amendment rights to own a firearm, which is guaranteed under our Constitution and needs to be protected at all costs. And it's amazing to me that the opponents of that, those who want to water down those rights, don't get it. The more they fight against them, the more we'll see laws banning red flag policies, because states are going to take preemptive action, especially states that are conservative based and have a strong conservative presence, where there's a strong Second Amendment supporting coalition and group, as we have in Kentucky. It's going to happen. And so Kentucky right now has no red flag law. It's not passed a ban like Texas has. Will Kentucky do it? We'll see, because we've seen real concern about any attempt to deny Second Amendment rights to individuals based on subjective determination by some government bureaucrat, even by law enforcement, as good as they do. You know, they cannot make these decisions subjectively and get it right in every case, and someone's rights and freedoms are going to be violated if we do. So I think that there's good reason for being concerned about this, and Texas certainly has taken action. Will Kentucky do so? We'll just have to wait and see. Finally, on today's program, Congressman Thomas Massie has taken a lot of heat for his opposition to some of Donald Trump's policies, some of the budget policies, and our social media post of the day comes from Liberty Wallace on Facebook, who says, for those who claim Thomas Massie is somehow unpatriotic or not MAGA because he stands in the way of a massive multi-trillion-dollar time bomb, or because he says we shouldn't bomb other countries, take note of what this national voice said, and I'll tell you who it is after I tell you what he said. He said, who is Congressman Thomas Massie? Thomas Massie is ideological, but more than that, he is a gentleman. He is a very decent man personally. He believes in self-restraint. He believes in self-reliance. He built his own off-grid house. He lives in the community he's from, knows everybody. His rise in politics was totally organic. He wasn't in the Young Leaders program at Davos. He's like the most American person, married his high school girlfriend who passed, has great kids who love him. I can't imagine a more American man than Thomas Massie. You can totally disagree with Thomas Massie. You can think his ideas are dumb or whatever, fine, but to impugn his character is so disgusting to me. And that comes from Tucker Carlson, national voice, defending Congressman Massie's integrity, and let me do the same. You know, I think it's fine to have disagreement. I think it's fine for President Trump to criticize Thomas Massie's policies, his positions. I think it's just as right and proper for Congressman Massie to take his stand and represent his constituents in the way he thinks they should be represented, and to stand upon the principles that he believes made this country great. We've always had these disagreements, and out of that, it's healthy, because out of that usually comes something that's really good for our country. So let's have the debate, let's have the disagreement, but let's not question motives and characters unless there's a reason to. I mean, and there's no reason to with Congressman Massie. He's been a great American, a great Kentuckian. He's been reelected by his district in Northern Kentucky several times, despite many attempts to try to defeat him. I predict that he'll be serving as long as he wants to. He's my friend, and I think he's a person of integrity, and I think he's a person of principle. I think Donald Trump also believes strongly in what he's doing. And out of that, let's have the debate. Let's have the argument. Let's not be afraid of that. But let's not impugn each other's character. I have not heard Thomas Massie do that with Donald Trump. It should not happen in Washington. We need better than that. Better than that. So thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate you being with us here on Kentucky's Voice. Be sure to join us this afternoon at 4 o'clock on television, Channel 21 WBNA, and we'll get to some of these text messages next time. Thank you all. God bless. Stay strong. Stay conservative. And God bless the Commonwealth.